Thanks for staying up later. Karen Allen is with us tonight. She was, as you know, Marion Ravenwood, the first heroine in the Raiders of the Lost Ark trilogy, but we're not going to start there. We're going to start with Starman, which was an enchanting movie of 5 or 6 years ago, a John Carpenter film that I understand you weren't 100% sold on. It took you a while to agree to do it. Is that true?
Well, I read the script and I set it down and I thought, what a beautiful story. I remember being initially just very impressed with the writing and with the actual storytelling in the script. But I was a little apprehensive about playing the character, just, I think, because of the circumstances that the character is in, that she meets a man or a being who has sort of come from outer space, has sort of reconstituted her husband's physical body and image, and I think it was just one of those difficult sort of what-ifs. You know, what if my husband passed away? I woke up in the middle of the night one night and a being from another planet and I just thought, I wasn't certain how you go about creating that believably.
You must have thought it had some potential, no matter how skillful the people involved were, some potential to be either absurd or schmaltzy or both.
I think I had a certain amount of fear of that. And I suppose, actually I don't know if Jeff ever did. I remember John Carpenter telling me Jeff walked in with the character when John first met him. And Jeff had sort of come up with, he'd been watching his children and watching birds. And he had sort of come up with this sort of like behavior that had to do with sort of everything being new, everything being a discovery. Everywhere his eye landed was this whole new discovery of something. And
now that you say it, mentioning watching birds, there was that little movement of the neck and that kind of thrust of the face that he affected there.
Yeah. Fill her up a minute.
Yes.
Gotcha.
For someone who studied at the Strasberg studio and has done lots of stage work, Animal House is an interesting note on your resume.
Yeah.
Did you have reservations about it, or was it at a stage of your career where you said, hey, this could be good, I got to grab this?
I didn't have reservations about it. I read it, I thought it was funny. I liked the character, I liked Katie. I found her very relatable too. She really got to be the voice of reason in the film. And I just had a great time. It was a wonderful group of actors that they put together for the film. And no, I didn't.
Somebody told me that during the course of that, or shortly after it, I forget which, you had a conversation with Belushi about the nature of fame.
I did. Well, I guess, Animal House was really, he had done a little part in Going South. Is that
I forget
the film?
if that he was in there, but
But Animal House was his first film, although he was quite well known already from Saturday Night Live. And I, at the time, was a sort of mad harmonica player, and I had brought all my harmonicas and everything to the set of Animal House, or not to the set, but we would all play music afterwards. And so he would come from time to time and pound on my door in the village where I was living and sort of want me to come out to some blues clubs and hear some great harmonica players, guitarists, singers. And I do remember having a very touching conversation with him about, I think, he found it an extremely difficult adjustment to make, to suddenly, become extraordinarily famous. And I think in some way he was trying to show, I had just come to New York. I'd been in New York about 4 or 5 months when I had been hired to do Animal House, and I think he was trying on some level to warn me or to share some of his experience with me of what it felt like to suddenly have so much attention on you and so much to be in the spotlight to such an extent. And I don't think it, I remember feeling that he was extremely uncomfortable with it.
Do you do a tentative little dance yourself with the idea of stardom? A lot of the reviews of your work have been close to rhapsodic, and you've been in at least two tremendously successful films, The Raiders of the Lost Ark and Starman, and there have been others. But I think it's fair to say that you're not a megastar.
Yeah.
Is that circumstance or a distance that you purposely keep?
Gosh, I don't know. I think I just like going about having a career in my own way, and I don't feel that I've really sort of pursued fame necessarily, pursued big pictures. A lot of times when I've done a film, as opposed to really feeling like, okay, now I've got to go and build this incredible film career, a lot of times the next thing that'll come along is a play, and I'll end up off, you know, up at the Long Wharf or something doing a play. And I suppose there are people who you know, in the industry who don't quite understand my approach. I don't know whether I'm shy of sort of fame or you know, building any sort of specific career. I just know that my interests sort of seem to create my own path in acting, and that I like doing both. I like doing something which is as high profile as a film, and then I like going off and doing something a little bit more private and more personal, which I find is the way I feel about the theater, that it's a much more intimate experience with the audience.
Is Raiders of the Lost Ark a plus all the way across the board, or was it in some sense kind of an unwelcome signature for you?
I think it's been, what happens, I think, a lot of times when one film is enormously successful, you get so identified with that film until you're in another film that is equally successful or more successful. Well, it's pretty difficult to make a film that's going to be more successful than Raiders of the Lost Ark. So I think in that sense, I made the film 10 years ago, and in that sense, that film has sort of followed me through the years and through an enormous amount of other work that I've done. Somehow people always hearken back to Raiders of the Lost Ark, which is great in a certain way, but at the same time, I think that happens to all actors.
Yeah.
That there is one film or two films that somebody gets identified with. I think in the way that it's difficult in certain ways, because a lot of times I might be interested in playing a character in films that's enormously different than Marion Ravenwood or even Jenny Hayden in Starman. And that very often what happens is you kind of get put in a niche, or people identify you with a certain type of film or a certain type of character, and that you have to work very hard to break that mold, to break out of that, to make people see you differently.
I need one of the pieces your father collected.
One thing about your Marion Ravenwood, obviously Indiana Jones needs a heroine, but it would have been too cliched for her to be a true damsel in distress. So you had to show some grit. You pop him in the nose right off the bat.
Right.
You got guys throwing knives at you, and they got flaming whips and stuff, and you're still holding fast in the face of this danger. That was the twist that gave it something other than, like, let's just update, you know, Tess Trueheart tied to the railroad tracks or something.
Yeah. Yes. And I really wanted her to be that way, too. I felt like I had to get in there and fight to not have her become, on some level, a damsel in distress. Because a little bit, I think the story initially had been written that way, that she sort of starts off as this very, very tough heroine, and then once she gets away from that bar in Nepal, and once we've seen this sort of wonderful, steely character, you know, you put her in this little white dress with no back and rip it off in little high heels. Suddenly she's just helpless. But I didn't want her to become helpless, even in her little white dress and her little high heels.
You've had several stage roles, obviously, but one that's particularly interesting to me is Helen Keller, about 20 years after where most people visualize her from The Miracle Worker, and Jane Alexander played the Annie Sullivan character. How did you go about portraying Helen Keller and knowing that you were getting it close to right? What was the process?
Well, I began with a number of things. Her voice became very important part of the process for me. And I spent quite a bit of time with children who were learning, deaf children who were learning to speak. And I think one thing that was very liberating is I began to realize that there is no deaf voice, that each child and each adult had their own specific problems in terms of learning to speak, and that Helen did too. And then I began to listen to a lot of recordings of her voice, and I got a lot of the tapes, films of her. There's some amazing ones of her and Annie. They were on a vaudeville circuit for a while, which most people don't know. She and Annie hit the road really to make a living and went on a vaudeville circuit, and they would explain how Annie had taught Helen to speak. What I had to do also had a little bit of creative or theatrical license, which is Helen's voice was very difficult to understand, and Annie very often would translate for Helen. But I, of course, because it was a play, had to improve her voice enough that the audience could understand what I was saying.
How did you teach yourself not to focus? How did you get a sort of haze around yourself?
There were a lot of really interesting problems with the character. I had to be able to hear because I had cues. I had to be able to see because I literally had to walk onto the stage and I had to move through the rooms. And even though I had learned to use furniture and things on the floor as reference points, there still had to be a sense of knowing where people were on the stage, knowing where the stage ended, and so what I learned to do is I learned to literally relax the muscles in the eyes that we use to focus. And I would relax those, and my eye wouldn't really see anything, except I would have some sense of peripheral vision where I would notice movement. But what it did is it allowed me, as the character, to sort of be in a place of belief where I really believed I wasn't seeing, even though on some level, of course, I was.
You couldn't react to movement, at least not
No, I couldn't
noticeably.
react to it, but I very often had to know
Yeah.
that the movement was taking place. So it's very difficult. It took place over a long period of time to be able to have someone come toward you and to not instantly do the things that we
Sure.
normally naturally do in response to someone extending a hand towards you, or and with the voice it was even more difficult because I couldn't hear inflections when people would speak to me. So things, Jane Alexander as Annie would spell something into my hand and speak at the same time, but I couldn't respond to her as though I had any awareness of the inflection or of the attitude or the emotion in her voice. I had to respond completely in relationship to what she was doing to my hand.
How do you go about assessing where you stand in a stage performance? Because except for maybe opening night or something, there's nothing on tape or on film. How do you evaluate it?
That's an interesting question. For me, it's mostly instinct. There are always areas that usually when I even begin the first night in front of an audience, up until the opening night, sometimes up until the very last performance, where there are areas of the play that just elude me, or elements of the character that continue to elude me, moments in the relationships between the characters. And I think just instinctively I'm very aware of what those are. And I focus on them little by little by little. And sometimes there are just those wonderful accidents. You'll come on stage in a very different frame of mind one night, and the scene will go very differently, and suddenly you'll understand something about the scene that you've never understood before. And probably it has to do with getting away from your intellectual idea of what the scene is about, and just really being in the moment and playing off the other actors and being alive with the words, and suddenly it becomes something that has been completely unclear for weeks or months can suddenly be true for the first time.
Back with Karen Allen, into the little-known facts file we go. You were in Manhattan.
Mm-hmm.
And as a matter of fact, you enjoyed it, you had a nice meal, and then you left Manhattan and went to the Bronx. You were in Manhattan, and what was your role in this fine film?
Well, you have to remember, at the point Woody Allen plays a writer who is extremely unhappy with his writing for this program, which is a comedy. And there's a point in which he's up in a booth, and the show is going on down below, and he's talking about how terrible his writing is and how bad the show is. And he's surrounded by, I think there are two men up there who are popping pills and saying, here, have a Valium, and he keeps going on and complaining about it. And down on the stage, on the sound stage, you see three comedians who are doing a bit, a little skit. And I think it's an interview skit we were doing, and I'm playing the wife of a close personal friend of Jimmy Connors, not Jimmy Connors, Jimmy Carter's. And I'm catatonic.
It's an interesting slip, though.
Yes, it is, isn't it? And I'm catatonic, and this came out of an idea that I had. Woody Allen hadn't had a chance to write us something, and so he had basically said, we're going to go up and shoot this, and you three just make up a bit. He wanted it to sort of be in poor taste. So we had come up with a bit which was going to be like a game show, sort of name that neurosis or name that psychosis. And I was going to play a catatonic, and a doctor was going to bring me on, and it was going to be a sort of silly kind of idea. And in the end, we changed and incorporated another idea, and I ended up still playing the catatonic. So it's just little flashes. It cuts back and forth, but I'm not surprised you don't remember, you don't remember it.
You've written a screenplay.
Yes. About 7 years ago, I read a book by Walker Percy called The Second Coming, which is just an extraordinarily beautiful story, basically a love story set in the South in the early 80s. And I've written the screenplay to that, and we're in the process of, it's headed towards being made as a film now.
And you'd appear in it as well, right?
I don't think I would, actually.
Really?
No. There may have been a point years ago when I first encountered the material that I had thought that there's a role of a woman named Alison Huger that I had thought I wanted to play. I think my first fascination with the material was really the character. But now that I've become so much more involved with the writing of it, I think it's very difficult to try and do both. I don't think I'd want to continue to work on the screenplay and try to act in the film simultaneously.
Karen Allen put in a half an hour. She didn't have to dodge any daggers or shriek at snakes. On the other hand, no handsome guy came down from outer space to whisk her away either, so it's a mixed bag. We're out of here. See you later.